It was supposed to be a normal flight. Just another early morning journey from New York to Miami, with sunlight glinting through the terminal windows and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the air. For 18-year-old Emily Carter, it was more than just a trip, it was a quiet escape. Emily had just graduated from high school and was flying south to visit her aunt, a retired flight instructor who had inspired her love for aviation. She'd always been fascinated by airplanes, the way they lifted hundreds of tons of metal gracefully into the sky, the endless clouds stretching beyond the window, the hum of engines that felt almost alive. She sat in seat 19A, by the window. A pair of earphones dangled from her neck, and she held a paperback aviation guide she'd read 100 times before. Her long brown hair brushed the window as she leaned her cheek against the cool glass, watching the city shrink below. The plane climbed through thick white clouds, leveling out smoothly. The captain's calm voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." A round of sighs followed, as passengers loosened their seat belts and began to settle in, flipping magazines, adjusting headrests, chatting softly. Everything was normal, peaceful. Emily smiled faintly. She had always felt safest in the sky. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines and the occasional clink of glasses as flight attendants served drinks. The sun cast golden streaks across the clouds, turning the sky into a sea of orange and blue. Emily looked out the window, her heart steady and calm. But then, something changed. At first, it was subtle. A low vibration beneath her feet, almost like distant thunder. Then a short, metallic rattle. She frowned, pulling one earphone out. The sound came again, sharper this time, from beneath the wing. Moments later, the seatbelt sign lit up, and a quiet hush fell over the cabin. A few passengers looked around, curious but unconcerned. Then came the captain's voice, only this time, it wasn't calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a technical issue. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." His voice trembled, slightly, but enough that Emily noticed. The attendants exchanged nervous glances, moving quickly down the aisles, checking latches and seatbelts. A baby started crying near the back. Someone coughed. Another passenger whispered, "What's happening?" Emily looked up at the intercom speakers. She'd heard enough flight communications to recognize the tone, that wasn't routine. Then, the plane jolted. It wasn't a small bump. It felt like something heavy had struck the fuselage from below. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Cups spilled. Someone screamed softly. The plane steadied again for a moment. The engines still roared, but something about their rhythm sounded uneven. Emily pressed her face against the window. The horizon tilted slightly, too slightly for most to notice, but not for her. The plane was losing altitude. Slowly, another announcement came through, this time from the co-pilot. His voice was strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are working on resolving the issue. Please stay calm." But as his words faded, the cockpit door remained closed. Flight attendants tried knocking, no response. One of them picked up the interphone, calling repeatedly. Still nothing. A few passengers began whispering. Some looked pale. Others fumbled for their phones, filming, praying, trembling. Emily's pulse quickened. She knew enough about aircraft to sense when something was seriously wrong. She glanced at the wings again. The left aileron was shaking slightly, almost like it wasn't responding properly. The plane dipped again, sharper this time. Gasps turned into screams. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling, swinging wildly. Alarms blared from the cockpit, faint but unmistakable. The attendants shouted instructions, trying to calm everyone, but their eyes betrayed fear. Emily gripped her seat, heart hammering. Her hands shook, but her mind started to focus. She had spent countless nights at home, sitting in her father's old computer chair, running flight simulations, learning controls, emergency procedures, communication codes. It was just a hobby. A dream. She never imagined it could mean anything real. Now, those hours flashed through her memory. Throttle, flaps, rudder, altitude, emergency descent. She could recall every sound, every warning light she'd practiced. The passenger beside her, an older woman clutching a rosary, looked at Emily with tears in her eyes. "Are we going to die?" she whispered. Emily's throat tightened. "No," she said softly. "We're not." But inside, she wasn't sure. The plane lurched violently to the left. People screamed. Drinks and bags flew across the aisle. The overhead bins rattled, some popping open. Emily's seatbelt dug into her waist, keeping her in place as the aircraft stabilized again, barely. Then the intercom crackled once more, but this time, there was only static. No voice. The flight attendants kept calling into the cockpit, pounding on the door, but no one answered. One attendant, a young man named Tyler, turned to the passengers, pale and sweating. "If anyone has any experience with flying, please come forward," he pleaded. No one moved. The silence was deafening. Emily's stomach twisted. Her fingers trembled. Every part of her screamed to stay seated, to let someone else fix it. But no one else was moving. Then she heard it, a distant alarm that only a simulator nerd like her would recognize, cabin pressure warning. Her instincts kicked in. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the terrified whispers around her. "I can help," she said, her voice barely steady. Tyler stared at her, stunned. "What? I know how to operate an aircraft. I've trained on simulators for years," Emily said quickly, her words trembling but clear. "I'm not a pilot, but I understand the basics. Let me try." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, motioning for her to follow. As Emily made her way toward the front, passengers stared, some in disbelief, others in desperate hope. A little girl reached out and whispered, "You can do it." Those words echoed in Emily's heart as she stepped into the narrow aisle, feeling the plane tremble beneath her feet. Tyler unlocked the emergency code to the cockpit door and pushed it open. The sight inside made Emily freeze. Both pilots were unconscious, slumped forward in their seats. Oxygen masks hung loose from their faces. The co-pilot's hand still rested on the throttle. The control panel flashed red and orange. Every warning light imaginable was glowing: hydraulic pressure failure, low altitude alert, electrical fault. It was chaos. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God." Tyler's voice cracked behind her. "Can you do anything?" Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. She grabbed the headset from the captain's seat and placed it over her ears. Static filled her world. Then, a faint voice broke through. "Flight 362, we've lost your signal. Identify yourself immediately." Her hands shook as she pressed the talk button. "This is Flight 362. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 18 years old. Both pilots are unconscious, and I need help." Silence. Then, a man's calm voice responded. "Emily, we hear you. This is air traffic control. You're doing great. Can you see your altitude?" Emily glanced at the instrument panel, 14,000 feet and dropping. "Yes," she said. "We're descending, fast." "Okay, Emily, listen carefully. You're not alone. We're going to guide you through this. Tyler tightened his grip on the back of the pilot's chair. "Can she really do this?" he whispered. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't think about failure. She focused on the controls, hands trembling, breath shallow, every nerve alive. Her entire world narrowed to the cockpit lights, the sound of her breathing, and the calm voice over the radio guiding her step by step. The cabin behind her was chaos, passengers crying, praying, holding hands, but Emily didn't turn around. She couldn't afford to. She adjusted the yoke carefully, remembering the feel from her simulator. The plane steadied slightly. "Good," said the controller. "Now hold that. You're doing great." Emily's eyes burned with tears, but she refused to blink. In her heart, she whispered a single prayer. "Please, don't let me fail them." Outside, the clouds broke apart, revealing flashes of the ocean below, blue, endless, terrifyingly close. The radio crackled again. "Emily, we're clearing all runways for you. You have our full attention. Just keep her steady." Emily nodded, whispering, okay, to herself. She had no idea how long it had been since the emergency began. Time had dissolved into adrenaline and faith. The only thing that mattered now was keeping that plane in the sky. At the back of the plane, people clutched each other's hands, murmuring prayers. Mothers hugged their children. Strangers wept together. And somewhere in that trembling cabin, hope began to flicker, fragile, but alive. Because one brave 18-year-old girl had stood up when no one else did. The world didn't yet know it, but at that very moment, Emily Carter was fighting for 211 souls, and for her own. As the sun dipped lower and the ocean glimmered beneath them, the voice from air traffic control spoke again. Emily, are you ready to try something? She exhaled slowly, steadying her hands on the controls. Yes, she whispered. Tell me what to do. And with that, her miracle began. The cockpit was filled with alarms, shrill, overlapping, desperate. Every red light on the control panel seemed to scream the same thing, failure. But Emily Carter, 18 years old and trembling in the pilot's chair, refused to back down. Her voice shook as she spoke into the radio. Air traffic control, this is Flight 362, both pilots are still unconscious. The plane is unstable, I'm trying to level it. A moment of static, then a calm, steady voice replied. Copy that, Flight 362. Emily, this is Captain Rhodes from Miami Tower. We're here with you. I need you to take a deep breath. You're doing great. Emily exhaled shakily, her hands tight on the yoke. The aircraft groaned under pressure, dipping slightly again. Outside, the horizon wavered, blue sky above, deep ocean below. Okay, Emily, Captain Rhodes continued, his tone steady and kind. First, tell me what you see on the altimeter. Emily glanced at the instrument panel. 11,000, and dropping. Good. Let's slow the descent. Pull back gently, not too much. Just enough to bring the nose up a little. Her hands trembled as she did it. The yoke resisted, heavy and alive, vibrating beneath her palms. For a second, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the plane began to level. A flicker of hope surged in her chest. It's holding, she said. Beautiful work, the captain replied softly. You've just stabilized a Boeing 737, Emily. The words didn't even feel real. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, sweat glistening on her forehead. Tyler, the flight attendant, stood behind her, clutching the headrest, eyes wide in awe and fear. Is there anything I can do? Tyler asked. Keep checking on the pilots, Emily said quickly, voice shaky but focused. See if they're breathing normally, and make sure the oxygen is flowing. Tyler nodded and knelt beside the captain, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. He's got a pulse, weak, but steady, he said. Emily nodded, relief washing over her for a split second. Then the radio crackled again. Emily, we've confirmed your flight's hydraulic system is partially offline, Captain Rhodes said. That means your flaps and landing gear might not respond normally. But we'll find a way. You're not alone, okay, she whispered, gripping the yoke tighter. She could still hear the muffled sobs of passengers through the closed cockpit door. Every sound, every prayer, every cry, weighed on her heart. 211 lives. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the little girl who had whispered, "You can do it." That voice gave her strength. Emily, let's go over the basics, said Rhodes gently. Your main goal right now is to maintain altitude and heading. You're going to fly manually for a bit. Can you tell me your current heading? She looked down. Heading, 180. Perfect. That keeps you pointed south toward Miami. We're clearing the airspace for you, no other planes within 50 miles. You have the sky to yourself. Emily exhaled slowly. Thank you. Now, I want you to look at the throttle levers. You'll see 2 of them, left and right. Push them forward together, just a little. We need to build some speed back. Her fingers slid forward on the levers. The engines responded with a deep roar. The aircraft shuddered, then smoothed out. That's it, Emily. Just like that, Rhodes said. How do you feel? Emily let out a nervous laugh. Terrified. That's okay, Rhodes replied gently. You're allowed to be scared. The brave ones always are. Tyler came back from checking the cabin. People are panicking, he said softly. But I told them you're flying the plane, they're starting to calm down. Emily's heart clenched. Don't tell them too much. Just tell them help is coming. Yes, ma'am, he said with a shaky smile. Outside the cockpit window, the endless ocean stretched out below, shimmering in sunlight, deceptively calm. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay safety. But between here and there, was every pilot's nightmare. Emily, Rhodes said again over the radio. I need you to check your fuel indicator. She looked. Fuel's still good, both tanks stable. Excellent. That gives us time. Time for what? To get you home. His calmness felt like an anchor, something solid to hold onto in the chaos. He reminded her of her aunt, who used to say, a good pilot doesn't fight the sky, she learns to dance with it. Emily smiled faintly at the memory. Dash dash dash. Suddenly, the aircraft jerked again, a harsh, metallic clunk followed by a flashing red light. Warning. Hydraulic pressure low. Emily gasped. Rhodes, we just lost more hydraulics. Copy that. Stay calm, Emily. You're going to need to rely on manual trim. Do you see the trim wheel near your right knee? She glanced down and nodded. Good. Start turning it slowly, counterclockwise. That will help you balance the nose pitch. She turned the wheel, her muscles aching from tension. The nose dipped, then steadied again. That's it. You've got it, Rhodes said, his voice brightening. You're doing beautifully. But Emily barely heard him. Her focus was absolute. Her mind wasn't the mind of an 18-year-old anymore. It was the mind of a pilot fighting for control. Every sound, every vibration, every flicker of light meant something. And somehow, she understood it all. Dash dash dash. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then 45. The Miami coastline appeared faintly ahead, a thin strip of land between the vast blue sky and ocean. Emily, Rhodes said quietly. You're less than 50 miles from Miami. How are you holding up? Emily blinked through tears she didn't remember crying. I'm still here. You're doing something extraordinary, he said. You've kept a 737 in the air longer than some trained pilots in crisis situations. You're a hero already. Emily shook her head. I'm not a hero. I just don't want anyone to die. There was silence on the radio for a moment. Then Rhodes said softly, that's what makes you one. Dash dash dash. Tyler leaned close. Emily, if we make it, people will remember this forever. She smiled faintly. If we make it. The engines roared steadily now. The plane had leveled at 6,000 feet, still descending slowly but under control. Then came the next instruction. Emily, we're going to prepare for descent and landing. You'll need to extend the landing gear manually. Do you see a small lever with a red handle under the throttle panel? Emily looked and found it. Yes. Okay. On my count, pull it down gently. She swallowed hard. Ready. 3, 2, 1, pull. She did. The plane jolted slightly, and then, a blessed sound. Landing gear locked. Rhodes cheered. You've got gear down. Beautiful job, Emily. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she let herself believe, maybe they would survive this. Dash dash dash. But then, another alarm blared. Terrain warning. Emily's heart stopped. Rhodes, we're too low. Stay calm. Increase throttle slightly, not too much. Pull back gently, just a few degrees. She followed every word, her entire body trembling. The engines roared louder, the nose lifted slightly, and the warning light flickered off. Good save, Rhodes said, his voice shaking now too. You're flying that plane like you were born to do it. Emily let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. I just want to get them home, she whispered. Dash dash dash. Inside the cabin, passengers clutched hands as the plane tilted slightly left. Some whispered prayers. Others stared out the windows, silent tears running down their faces. A mother whispered to her son, that girl is flying the plane. That young girl. The boy nodded, eyes wide. She's not scared, but she was. Every second, Emily fought back fear so powerful it felt like drowning. She could taste metal in her mouth, her throat dry, her fingers numb. Yet she didn't stop. Emily, Rhodes said again. We've got you lined up for runway 27 at Miami International. I want you to start descending slowly, bring her down to 3,000 feet. Copy that, she whispered. Her voice cracked, but her hands stayed steady. Dash dash dash. As the plane descended through clouds, the Miami skyline came into view, sunlight glinting off distant buildings. Passengers gasped as they saw land again. Someone began clapping softly, whispering, we're going to make it. Emily didn't dare look back. Her world was the cockpit. The gauges. The radio. The runway ahead. Emily, Rhodes said gently. We're almost there. You're going to start your approach in a minute. You've done everything right. Now it's time to bring her home. Tears blurred her vision. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can, Rhodes said firmly. You already are. You've flown through every warning, every failure, and every fear. You've got 211 hearts beating behind you, and they're counting on yours. Emily wiped her eyes. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. Dash dash dash. The plane began its final descent. 3,000 feet. 2,500. 2,000. The runway lights appeared in the distance, a glowing path through the haze. Emily, you're lined up perfectly, Rhodes said softly. Ease off the throttle a little, that's it. You're coming in beautifully. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear him. Now, just before the runway, pull back gently on the yoke. Let her kiss the ground. She nodded, breath shallow. Outside, the runway grew larger, closer, clearer. She could almost hear the collective heartbeat of everyone on board. Easy, Rhodes whispered over the radio. Easy, Emily, you've got this. Dash dash dash. And then, with a trembling breath, Emily pulled back on the controls. The wheels touched the ground with a screech. Sparks flew. The plane bounced once, twice, then steadied. Brakes squealed. The engines whined down. The plane slowed, stopped. Silence. For a long, endless moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, from somewhere in the cabin, came a sob, and applause. It spread through the aircraft like a wave. People wept, laughed, shouted, hugged. Emily's hands fell from the yoke. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the controls, tears streaming down her face. Tyler placed a hand on her shoulder, voice breaking. You did it. Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. Air traffic control erupted in cheers. And over the radio, Captain Rhodes' voice came softly. You did it, Emily. You brought them home. The plane had stopped moving. For a few seconds, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, only the heavy, trembling silence of disbelief. Then, the cabin exploded into noise. Applause, cries, laughter. People were hugging strangers, sobbing into each other's shoulders. Tyler, the young flight attendant, sank into a seat, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't stop looking at Emily, the teenager sitting motionless in the captain's chair, her hands still gripping the controls. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Her body trembled from exhaustion, adrenaline, and disbelief. The world outside the cockpit windows glowed with flashing red and blue lights, fire trucks, ambulances, emergency teams racing toward the aircraft. The voice from the radio broke through the static, soft and full of awe. Flight 362, you are safely on the ground. Welcome home, Emily. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She just nodded, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks. Dash dash dash. When she finally stood up, her legs nearly gave way beneath her. Tyler caught her arm gently. Easy, he whispered. You did it. It's over. But in her mind, it wasn't over yet. She turned toward the unconscious pilots. The emergency crew was already rushing aboard. Within minutes, paramedics were checking their vitals, oxygen masks fitted over their faces. Both were alive. Barely, but alive. One of the rescuers looked at Emily, confused. Wait, who landed this thing? Tyler smiled through his tears and pointed. She did. The man's eyes widened. Her. Emily just looked down, her voice small. We all did. Dash dash dash. The passengers began to exit the plane one by one, some limping, others clutching their loved ones, many still crying. When Emily finally stepped into the aisle, they started clapping again. An old man in a suit stood and pressed his hand to his heart. You saved us, he said softly. A mother with her daughter whispered, You're our angel. The little girl, the same one who had told Emily you can do it, ran up and hugged her. I knew you would, she said, smiling through tears. Emily knelt down, hugging her tightly, her own tears falling onto the child's shoulder. Thank you for believing in me, she whispered. Dash dash dash. Outside, the Miami sun was just beginning to set. The runway shimmered with heat, the air thick with disbelief. Firefighters, medics, and airport staff surrounded the plane, some cheering, some simply staring in astonishment. Cameras clicked. News vans were already pulling up at the terminal. The story had spread through the control towers. An 18-year-old passenger just landed a Boeing 737. As Emily descended the stairs, her feet touched the ground, solid, real, and warm. She looked up at the vast sky above, the same sky she had once dreamed of flying in. Now, it had nearly taken her, but also given her a purpose she'd never imagined. Dash dash dash. A man ran toward her across the tarmac, Captain Rhodes, the voice who had guided her through the radio. He looked older than she had imagined, with silver hair and kind eyes filled with emotion. He didn't say a word at first. He just hugged her tightly. You did everything right, he he said finally, his voice trembling. You saved 211 people, Emily. You saved them all. She pulled back slightly, her voice barely a whisper. I was so scared. He smiled softly. Everyone's scared. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what you did anyway. Emily nodded, her chest tightening. I just didn't want anyone to die. Rhodes placed his hand gently on her shoulder. And because of you, no one did. Hours later, after she gave her statement and medical teams confirmed the pilots would recover, Emily sat alone in a quiet airport office. Her hands still shook. She stared at them, the same hands that had held the yoke steady through chaos, fear, and fire. She could still hear the alarms. Still feel the resistance of the plane. Still see the terrified faces behind her. And yet, through all of that, she'd found something she never knew she had: calmness in crisis, faith in herself. The door opened softly. Captain Rhodes stepped in again, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed her one. Long day, he said with a small smile. She laughed weakly. The longest of my life. He nodded, sitting across from her. You know, most people train for years before facing something like that. You had maybe, what, flight simulator experience? Yeah, she said quietly. Just a home setup. My aunt used to teach me when I was little. She was a pilot. She'd be proud of you, he said gently. Emily looked down at her coffee, her reflection rippling in the cup. I didn't even think. I just did what I had to. That's what real pilots do, he replied. Instinct takes over. You acted with heart, not ego, not panic. That's rare. Outside the window, the damaged 737 stood surrounded by lights and emergency vehicles. The sight made her chest tighten. She thought about the moment the plane first started dropping, the sound of the engines failing, the screams, the fear. And then she thought about the silence when the wheels touched down, that instant when she knew, truly knew, they were safe. It was the purest silence she'd ever heard. By midnight, the airport had quieted down. Most of the passengers were gone, escorted to hotels or to waiting family. Reporters still lingered at the gates, their voices excited and urgent. Emily stepped outside for a breath of air. The night sky stretched above her, deep and endless, scattered with stars. She closed her eyes. In the hum of distant engines and the soft Florida breeze, she whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Thank you. For the strength she hadn't known she had. For the strangers who believed in her. For the voice that guided her home. A few days later, Emily's story was everywhere. Headlines read, 18-year-old saves 211 lives. Miracle landing in Miami. Teen passenger flies plane after pilot's collapse. But Emily didn't see herself as a hero. She avoided interviews at first, overwhelmed by the attention. When she finally agreed to speak publicly, it was only because she wanted to thank the people who had helped, the air traffic controllers, the flight attendants, and the passengers who prayed with her. Standing in front of microphones, dressed simply, she said quietly, I'm not a pilot, I'm just someone who refused to give up when it mattered most. I didn't land that plane alone, God was my co-pilot. The room fell silent. Some reporters wiped away tears. That one sentence, God was my co-pilot, would echo around the world. Weeks passed. The airline offered Emily a full scholarship to train as a commercial pilot. At first, she hesitated. The memories were still raw. The fear, the sound of alarms, the shaking controls. But every time she thought about it, she remembered that feeling when the wheels touched the runway, the moment she knew she'd done it. That feeling told her who she was meant to be. On her first day at flight school, Emily stood on the tarmac again, dressed in a crisp white pilot shirt with her name embroidered on it. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the small training planes lined up neatly in a row. She reached out and touched one of them, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. It was smaller than the 737, much smaller, but the same hum of life ran through it. She smiled softly. This time, she whispered, I'm ready. Years later, people still talked about Flight 362. It became one of the most incredible aviation stories in history, not because of the malfunction, but because of the girl who refused to let fear decide the ending. Whenever someone mentioned Emily Carter's name, they spoke of courage, quiet, real, human courage. Airlines added new training for emergencies inspired by her actions. Pilots told her story to new recruits. Parents told it to their children when they were afraid of flying. And every now and then, Emily herself would sit by an airplane window, watching the clouds drift by, and smile. Because the sky, the same sky that once tested her, was now her home. One evening, years later, she was co-piloting a commercial flight to Los Angeles. As they reached cruising altitude, the captain leaned over and said with a grin, "You know, Emily, I've heard this story about a teenager who once landed a plane full of passengers all by herself. Sounds unbelievable." Emily chuckled softly, her eyes on the horizon. "Yeah," she said, "it was a good story." The captain laughed. Whatever happened to her? Emily smiled faintly. She learned how to fly properly. They both laughed. But when the cabin lights dimmed and the passengers settled in, Emily glanced out at the endless stars above the wing. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. And quietly, to herself, she whispered the same words that had carried her through that impossible day. "I didn't fly alone.